I'm going to be sharing with you information about the very important Supreme Court case, Tinker versus Des Moines. And the question we're going to be answering is, do students have rights? From 1955 to 1975, the United States was engaged in the Vietnam War. The goal of the United States was to rid Vietnam of communism. However, during those 20 years, 58,220 Americans died. At the time, the United States military was lacking manpower. Therefore, they instituted a draft, during which 2.2 million American men were drafted into the military to fight in Vietnam out of a pool of 27 million. Pictured here is an example of a draft card. And similar to Hunger Games, those draft cards were drawn and people were then forced to go and fight. In response, below, people were burning their draft cards because they were so vividly against the conflict in Vietnam. Throughout the country during the 1960s and 70s, students who were eligible for the draft decided to protest throughout college campuses everywhere. One such place was actually at Northwestern here in Evanston. And in 1970, thousands of students organized a sit-in protest of the draft and the Vietnam War. All of this played an influence into what Mary Beth Tinker did next. When Mary Beth Tinker was 13 years old, she decided to wear a black armband to school in protest of the United States' involvement in Vietnam. She organized a group of her friends to wear the armbands as well. They were warned by the principal to not wear the armbands as they would cause a disruption to learning, but the students decided to wear them anyway. In response, the principal suspended Mary Beth Tinker for 5 days. However, the parents of Mary Beth Tinker decided to sue the school in response because this violated her First Amendment rights. The parents of Mary Beth Tinker were suing the school because they violated her First Amendment rights. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. The Tinker family was arguing, number one, that this was in violation of Mary Beth Tinker's freedom of speech because the symbols of the black armband were a symbol of protest. They were a symbol, which means they were an example of speech. The second argument is that students, just like citizens, have the right to peacefully assemble or protest. The armbands and the organization of students who wore them were an example of a peaceful protest. In response, the school argued and stuck by their first argument that Mary Beth Tinker and her organization of Friends with the Black Armbands caused a disruption to the learning environment. In addition, they argued that this could lead to further violence or conflict at school, as some students were actually giving Mary Beth Tinker and her friends really nasty looks in the hallway. And in order for the school to ensure the safety of all students, they must prohibit this type of activity. However, the students, including Mary Beth Tinker and her family, argued that citizens and students have the same rights, and that those two rights include the right to free speech and the right to peacefully assemble. In addition, they argued that wearing black armbands did not violate any school rules. As the Supreme Court was attempting to decide what to do with this case, they used the precedent case of Stromberg versus California. This case was decided in 1931, following World War I, in the center of the Great Depression. At the time, there was an organization in California known as the Better America Foundation, which empathized with communism, the economic philosophy that was very popular in Eastern Europe. At the time, the United States was involved in ongoing conflicts against communism as the United States was a capitalist country. Yetta Stromberg, a young woman in California who was a counselor at a summer camp, decided to carry with her a red flag. When she was found in possession of this flag, she was arrested because of a law in California that had outlawed them. When the Supreme Court got hold of the case, they decided, in fact, that the state of California was violating Yetta's rights to freedom of speech. The red flag is not unconstitutional. The law against the red flag is unconstitutional. This case is similar to Tinker versus Des Moines in that both of these cases have symbols that have strong, sometimes unpopular meanings. In addition, both cases involve the First Amendment. However, they are different. Yetta was not in a school, and Yetta was not even displaying the flag. She just had it in her bag. When all was said and done, 7 justices on the Supreme Court decided in favor of Mary Beth Tinker and her friends. They decided that students, in fact, do have rights, not just including freedom of speech, but also all rights protected under the Constitution. In addition, they mentioned that students should not be punished just because of a suspicion that they might do something wrong. Just like citizens out there on the street, you need to have probable cause, meaning you need to have actual quantifiable evidence in order to even accuse someone of a crime. You cannot just suspect that someone might be guilty. However, 2 justices still said, in fact, that Mary Beth Tinker was in the wrong and the school was in the right. In schools, we are there for learning, the dissent said. In addition, they said that freedom of speech does not mean that you get to say whatever you want whenever you want. For example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Why does this still matter today? Because the Supreme Court decided in favor of Mary Beth Tinker, these rights still belong to students everywhere in the United States. However, often it feels like students are not entirely aware of their rights. In general, students do have rights as protected under the Bill of Rights. However, the Supreme Court did say, when all was said and done, that schools do have to protect the safety and security of their students, and they do have the right to determine whether or not something is a disruption to the learning environment.